Welcome back. At 17:40 GMT, you're watching Biz Africa. South African stocks fell sharply in afternoon deals on Thursday, pushing the benchmark index down more than 2% and setting it up for its biggest drop in more than 3 months. The JSE Top-40 index was down 2.03% to 36,555.54 points by 11:48 GMT, and the wider all-share index was down 1.77% at 41,094.09 points. Industrial metal miners weighed down as investors fretted about demand after factory activity in China, that's the world's biggest commodities consumer, shrank for the first time in 7 months. The preliminary HSBC China Manufacturing Purchasing Managers Index fell to 49.6 in May compared with the final reading of 50.4 in April. Now, the latest reading, of course, is in contractionary territory, is marked by a figure below 50. Investec also slipped after the investment bank and asset manager missed forecasts with respect to its annual earnings. Now, obviously, this week has not been a good one for South Africa. The question is, how does one navigate around the tense labour situation in South Africa and the ripple effects around that right now? Let's ask someone with some hands-on experience. Kuseni Dlamini is the former chief executive of All Mutual in South Africa and Anglo-American's operations in South Africa as well. He joins us now live in Johannesburg. Mr. Dlamini, thank you so much for your time this evening. You used to run South Africa's single largest private employer. What makes this year's labour tension different from anything you faced in the past?
There are three factors to mention that make it different. I mean, firstly, we're having a new trade union movement called the Association of Mine Workers and Construction Union, AMCU, which is contesting territory against the established National Union of Mine Workers, NUM, in the Platinum Belt in South Africa. And the contestation has tended to be violent and deadly, as we saw with the Marikana incident or massacre of last year. So that is one factor. It's a new dynamic. The second factor is that South Africa is going towards general elections next year. And usually in the build-up to general elections, there is a lot of jostling for position to build constituencies and rally around the working class to this or that political formation. So the political dynamic cannot also be ruled out. The third factor is that South Africa now is one of the most, if not the most unequal societies in the world. So we are seeing the triple evils of inequality, poverty, and unemployment really taking their toll in South Africa. And linked to that are really the very challenging socio-economic conditions in which mine workers live, and indeed the surrounding communities around the mines live. And that is combined to really create a very hostile and very difficult environment for mining companies. And of course, needless to say, we have seen global commodity prices also going down, which also adds another very difficult challenge for mining companies in South Africa.
And that really segues straight into the next question here, because you've got commodity prices which are lower on one hand and illegal strikes on the other. Is there really any room on mining companies' balance sheets to accommodate the extra wage demands that are being made by the unions?
I think South Africa needs a much more strategic conversation rather than a tactical or transactional conversation around wages. I think the industry and the country at large need to have a conversation around how can the industry reclaim its former position of glory? How can it be globally competitive? As we all know that South Africa has to compete for foreign direct investment in mining, just like other countries like Brazil and Australia and Colombia and Chile have to. So South Africa has got a challenge to really create a labor environment that is conducive to attracting and retaining investors. And that requires leaders in the mining industry, leaders in the labor movement, as well as leaders in government to really be aligned in terms of how to rescue the industry from the challenges that it is facing now.
Let me read something for you from the South African Reserve Bank Governor Gim Marcus. Earlier today, she said, and I'm quoting here, the Rand's current weak levels raise the question of using a depreciated currency to improve competitiveness. And if there is a depreciation, it is maintained and not eroded by either wage demands or price hikes. Now, essentially, there's a depreciation versus competitiveness argument being thrown up there. But do you agree with her basic argument?
I think she's making a very important point, and I think it's a point that the mining industry in particular will agree with, because it's an export-oriented industry rather than being import-oriented, and it's a beneficiary of depreciating rent. I mean, the key thing to me, it's not about whether the rent is low or high or weak or strong. What we need is a very stable exchange rate to enable businesses to properly plan and strategize for the medium and the long term. The challenge that we are having now is having a volatile currency, which makes planning to be a bit challenging under the circumstances. So we need conditions that will create the necessary stability and the requisite confidence that can underpin a very stable and predictable exchange rate, which will make it conducive for businesses to plan properly.
Indeed. Speaking of the exchange rate, finally, Mr. Dlamini, the rand has fallen about 12% so far in the year-to-date against the American dollar, the bulk of those losses coming in the last couple of weeks. How do you think that weakening exchange rate will play out in negotiations between the unions and mine management?
Yeah, that's going to be a challenging one because the unions may actually argue that a weaker rand actually underpins positive fundamentals for the mining industry. But again, the impact of exchange rate as we see it now takes time to feed into the overall fundamentals of a business. So while in the short term it may be going down, and I don't think it will have an immediate and direct impact on the negotiations. I think that the topical things are around inequality, unemployment and poverty, and in addition, the issue of the gap between what executives are paid and what ordinary shop floor workers are paid. Those are issues that are being contested. And also in the broader macroeconomic environment in South Africa, we've seen utility bills going up, price of electricity going up, we're seeing toll roads being implemented, and that adds additional pressure on an already constrained consumer, which does not really augur well for the negotiations between workers and the mining companies, needless to say.
Indeed. We'll have to leave it there for the time being. Thank you very much for your time. That's Kusani Dlamini. He is a former chief executive of Old Mutual South Africa. And of course, he also used to run Anglo American's operations in South Africa as well. We've been talking about the turmoil that has been racking through South Africa's mining sector and what can be done to sort that out.